Hello and welcome to Face to Face. Our guest today is Ingmar Lee. Ingmar's been on the show before, quite a while ago, and I think we even repeated one of his programs, so you may be a bit familiar with him. If not, all I can say about Ingmar Lee, well, there's a lot of things I could say, but I'll say he's a great environmentalist. He's worked on the issues, he knows the issues, and not only does he talk about them, but he has walked the walk. So settle down and listen in, because you're going to hear, I think, a lot of great stuff in the next hour. So hello, Ingmar.
Hi, Jack. Nice to see you again.
We mentioned earlier that we'd start off just by talking a little bit about this boreal rainforest agreement that a lot of you have probably seen in the media, talked about in the media lately. It's being portrayed as, hey, a great deal for the environment, but from what I've seen, there's a lot of questions about that, so maybe we can talk about that a bit first, if you know much about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just come out in the last few weeks, and I'm not sure what exactly has come out. It's sort of, I haven't been able to go and actually study the deal or whatever it is, but from what I'm getting is that the exactly what it is hasn't been very clearly established anyway. The people that are reading it and looking at it are raising a lot of serious concerns that, the deal was a lot more rosy for the Abitibi-Bowater and the companies that are slathering to get in there.
You mean the logging companies?
Yeah.
Now, we should just mention that there is a history now of these kinds of deals being signed by some of the big players in the environmental movement in Canada and the United States. And they're not like the Great Bear Rainforest deal. I mean, it was the same thing. It was, I believe, Greenpeace, the Sierra Club of BC, and
Forest Ethics.
Forest Ethics.
Yeah, well, there is one common theme that really raises the red flag for me, and that's when you see Forest Ethics. Forest Ethics is an American organization that's got a couple of people working here on what's called Forest Ethics Canada. And they have no democratic process. They don't have a board of directors or anything that's elected to help shape their policies or anything like that. But forest ethics is deeply integrated into the environmental discussion at the government levels. And they seem to have be able to get access to secret backroom negotiations to hammer out these kinds of deals, which inevitably fall short. Very short, such as the Great Bear Rainforest deal, for example, which Gordon Campbell lauded to great political advantage just prior to the recent or the
and
last election.
And not only Gordon Campbell, but I think the media has portrayed that deal, that agreement, as being a big win for the environment. A lot of stuff is protected. So basically we see the corporate-owned media and the corporate politicians saying it's a great deal, and forest ethics as well. But I think you know a fair bit about that one. So.
Well, I mean, the common theme that goes through all of these compromise deals, whether it's the Great Bear Rainforest, the mountain caribou deal, where Forest Ethics had confidentiality agreements, secret negotiations about that, without having told a whole slew of environmental groups that had actually banded together and issued a declaration about the amount of old-growth forest that was required, a very well-researched and scientifically based declaration that really outlined what was necessary for the mountain caribou. And then suddenly Forest Ethics surfaces with the government announcement as having been in both meetings. They were sitting there pretending to be involved with the Kootenai environmental organizations, hammering out a deal, but meanwhile they were secretly sitting there conniving with the Gordon Campbell government behind the backs of all these other groups, and they eventually stabbed them in the back. Then there's the boreal.
And again, that's the agreement to protect, in quotation marks, huge amounts of the northern forest. And Forest Ethics, again, was at the table with a lot of other big players. Now, I've gotten emails from people who seem to have taken fairly close looks at this. I can't guarantee that what they're saying is correct, but I sure know that what the media is telling us isn't correct. And what they're saying is that nothing is being protected. Huge amounts are going to be logged. but it makes it look good, and so that's the plan. You sign an agreement that makes the corporations look good. The media tells the public that everything is protected, and the only loser is the environment. If the environment is the loser, I mean, maybe this is a great deal, but the record doesn't state that that is happening.
I just have no confidence in anything that forest ethics does. They're just too cozy with the various right-wing governments and, just too prepared to sit there and purport to negotiate and discuss on behalf of the environmental community. Even more frightening is seeing forest ethics deeply involved in the Enbridge Gateway pipeline, and there's a leadership vacuum on that issue right now, and a number of these corporate environmental organizations such as Forest Ethics are jockeying for a leadership position in there right now.
Now, maybe before you start talking about the Enbridge, is it called the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline? I saw a picture somewhere, and basically it's a pipeline that is going to run from around Edmonton.
Yeah, Bruderheim,
in
Alberta.
a fairly straight line right across BC. So take a look at your maps, folks. Through, through what is left of, and we'll come to the west coast at Kitimat, and we'll carry not oil but bitumen from the tar sands to the west coast, and then that will be taken in tankers. I think you said 200 a year. Tankers that will take this tar to China or Asia and the west coast of the United States. Again, the media is not asleep. They're deliberately not telling people. I mean, this should be a front page story every day of the month, as it's playing along right now. But the media is keeping it quiet. And there's forest ethics.
Yeah, well, just to reiterate the facts of the Enbridge Gateway pipeline, and that is on their website. You can see all that.
Okay, and I think you call it the Gordon Campbell pipeline.
Yeah, I call it the Gordon Campbell pipeline because we know that Gordon Campbell's not going to be around for a fourth term. People are exhausted with Gordon Campbell. I mean, even the hardcore neocon conservative element in our society, which is a very great minority, is fed up with him. And Gordo is looking for his legacy. And I think he would prefer to have the Site C Dam named after him, the Gordon Campbell Dam, sort of like the Wacky Bennett Dam kind of thing. But I think it's important that the people of BC recognize Gordon Campbell as being the chief proponent of this incredible pipeline project. And so therefore it should be called the Gordon Campbell Pipeline. And the Gordon Campbell Pipeline is slated to stretch from Bruderheim near Edmonton, Alberta, all the way across British Columbia to the west coast at Kitimat. And it's two pipelines, actually. One of them is 36 inches in diameter, a very large pipe. And the other one's about 24 inches in diameter. And one of them would deliver drilling fluids, condensates, all the way from the Pacific coast to Alberta to be used in the process of lubricating the pipelines to deliver the oil.
So and the other pipeline will be taking...
Well, the other one...
Which I heard is very toxic.
It's all sort of a trade secret. I've never seen any kind of credible analysis of what exactly condensate is. It's a
one
secret.
Is carrying condensate from the west coast to Alberta, and the bigger
That's
pipeline.
the smaller one. And the bigger one, the 36-inch pipe, 1,170 kilometers long, would be delivering tar sands, bitumen products, all the way to the west coast, where it would be loaded onto more than 200 giant super tankers, 1,000-foot, very large crude carriers, which would then thread their way through the narrow, rock-strewn fjords of the BC Central Coast, right through one of the wildest and most magnificent archipelagos that remains on the planet.
An area
all those
almost
islands.
as rich as the Gulf of Mexico used to be.
Well, I mean, that's what's inevitable. And the Gordon Campbell Pipeline is facing some very severe obstacles right now. The coastal First Nations have banded together and unanimously declared that it is off limits. The Haida, the Haltsik, the Haisla, the Kitasoo, all of the First Nations are united in opposing the Enbridge Gateway Pipeline. And I should mention that our little Central Coast Chamber of Commerce, of which I'm a member, after 3 meetings, and I have to sort of say that this is one of my very few due process victories, because I'm generally a skeptic of due process, but the Central Coast Chamber of Commerce has also written a declaration that says that the Central Coast Chamber of Commerce strongly condemns and opposes the Enbridge Gateway Pipeline and associated oil tanker traffic, in solidarity with the unanimous Coastal First Nations Declaration. And this is important. We don't have any power as a small Chamber of Commerce, but our declaration it contradicts the central directive of the BC Chambers of Commerce. If you look at the policies of the BC Chambers of Commerce, it says that, Chambers of Commerce shall support the offshore oil and gas development. They are supportive of that. So we're contradicting that, and that's why I felt it was important to get our little chamber, because everybody on the Central Coast, whether they're business of any sort, is opposed to the pipeline.
So
they know that we will have
opposed to it.
A Gulf disaster there.
A lot of business is opposed to it. Some business must support it.
80% of British Columbians are opposed to it.
Now, there's a fact. If 80% of British now, where does that number come? I'm sure 80% of British Columbians are opposed to it. In a democracy, if 80% of the population is opposed to something, we have to ask ourselves, how can it be going ahead?
Well, first of all, just to answer that, in a democracy now, Jack, you cannot say that we have a credible democracy here in BC.
That's exactly the point. So then we have to move from the thought that we're always told that we live in a democracy. We have to face the sad fact that we do not live in a democracy, and the other sad fact that we do not have a free press, which is why this whole issue is being kept so well hidden.
I use the example for people that are, believe that we actually live in a democracy here in BC, of, the 2001 election, when the Gordon Campbell government was elected with 77 out of 79 seats. They got 97% of the power in British Columbia with about 30% of the vote. You have slightly more than 50% of the people that had enough confidence in the elections to go and to bother to vote. People don't vote because not vote because they're lazy. They don't vote because it's clearly futile. It's a waste of time to vote in our farcical excuse for democracy. And so Gordon Campbell, in all of his elections, he's a deeply unpopular premier in British Columbia, but he's able to garner 30% of the vote, and the progressive opposition is divided. The NDP likes to believe that it's the natural home for environmentalists and that sort of thing, but their policies are so primitive, so environmentally illiterate, that the green-minded population of British Columbia just can't vote NDP. And the Green Party has its issues too. Anyway, the progressive vote gets divided. Gordon Campbell takes advantages of that and continues to. We get these hard right-wing governments.
But even more fundamental problem. You just laid it out there. That's the situation. But the problem, as you say, the Green Party has this problem. The problem is that it shouldn't be what these politicians want. We're not hiring them to run the show. We're not hiring them as governments to tell us what to do. We're paying them to manage the economy and the society, and especially the society, the way we want it managed. And then they get elected, and we find out, everybody knows this by now, that they're not working for us from the beginning. The political process has been taken over by big business. Yeah. And when we get right down to everything, that's the fundamental problem in this country.
But I just want to speak to that, Jack, because I mess around with the due process. I don't take due process as the end-all, be-all. I'll exploit due process, like in situations like the Central Coast Chamber of Commerce, for example, where you can go in and play that game and sort of throw the system against itself like that, for the Chamber of Commerce to issue a statement like that. However, the corporate media, we do our nonviolent civil disobedience actions, like for forest defense and that sort of thing. You have to sort of play the corporate media. You make your tree sits very spectacular. You do stunts like, I'm facing a charge in the court right now for climbing the flagpole on the front lawn of the BC legislature and hanging a large banner about the Gordon Campbell pipeline. The corporate media didn't pick that up, we put out a press release and that sort of thing. It did get some coverage, but the mileage that it gets is in the progressive internet world. And even in the corporate media, there's a lot of bewailing and hand-wringing right now because it's all collapsing, CanWest going bankrupt and all that sort of thing. It's a wonderful thing to see CanWest groveling and struggling like that because they're just such just an embarrassment to our society.
The only problem is what's coming with Shaw taking over. And Shaw's taking over the TV end of it. I'm not sure the creditors are taking over the newspaper end of it. Well. Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is that, for issues like the Gordon Campbell pipeline, when you see fake environmental organizations like Forest Ethics, for example, Forest Ethics, and I just have to remind the viewers that the CEO of Forest Ethics, or perhaps she would prefer to be called the executive director or something, this is Sephora Berman, who I take a lot of my inspiration that the progressive world is actually a majority, where people are it's not the democratically elected elections which demonstrate a majority opinion. The progressive world is a majority that hasn't quite realized, and the due process system by which we organize ourselves politically and have social order and that sort of thing is not serving this progressive majority. There's no existing social structure by which we organize ourselves that's functioning properly for the progressive community to apply the drastic change that's necessary in our society. So the progressive, I believe we've just reached a kind of a critical mass with the progressive community in the world, which we have a really good example at Copenhagen. Copenhagen exceeded my expectations of patheticness. It was so beyond belief to see, the hideous Stephen Harper, the fat slob Stephen Harper waddling over to Copenhagen and embarrassing our country in front of the world. I was thinking about it today that, Canadians, they don't overtly flaunt their nationality, but a Canadian might travel in the world and put a little Canadian flag pin on their backpack or on their lapel or something like that, or stitch a little badge onto their pack. Over the last few years, I've seen traveling in the world that you'd be more likely to find that it's an American that's wearing the Canadian flag pin, because to go around Europe and have an American flag on your backpack, or to go around Asia, even worse. Americans are terrified to be known as Americans, and they've been taking advantage of the fact that we sound similar, we look similar, and they've been wearing our Canadian flags. Well, the Canadian flag is nothing to be proud of in the world anymore. We've lost that image. People are now associating the image of Canada in their mind's eye with, whereas before it was of forests and clean water and enormous empty landscapes. Now it's the creeping tar sands
I agree.
view goes into it. So,
and that's why Stephen Harper maintains his popularity, because he does all these things that the rest of the world is horrified at, and our own media doesn't even tell us about it.
Well, the thing about I just want to finish that point about the Copenhagen. What really blew me away about Copenhagen that I hadn't expected was what was going on outside on the street. 120,000 people demonstrating, carrying signs, the predominant message of which said system change, not climate change. What's happening, I believe, is that we're reaching a critical mass where the progressive majority community in the world has become a majority, and it's reaching a critical mass. These are awakened people that understand the global ecological catastrophe. They understand the chimera of economic security and all that lie that our economic order and structures of our society is what's holding us all together, and they're finding their power. This power is not going to be focused and channeled through the conventional political structures. It's about doing an end run around the political structures. I used to think that I needed to have government support and the support of the order of our society to forward environmental projects. And then I used to see government as being an obstacle to forwarding those projects, and that one had to, go conventionally through due process and make your arguments and make your cases and all that sort of thing. And that if you didn't have the support of the corporate media and the government and all that sort of thing, you were unlikely to succeed. But now, in 2010, with this critical mass, this progressive majority, I'm realizing that the government is irrelevant. We just do not have to waste our time in those conventional political structures. People are moving, and on the Enbridge Gateway pipeline, that pipeline will not be defeated by due process conventional environmentalism. That pipeline's going to be defeated by First Nations, and it's going to be defeated by individual nonviolent civil disobedience. It's going to be defeated by public opinion that can't be manipulated or controlled or organized by the corporate media. And it's going to be defeated by people that are recognizing the futility and uselessness of the government processes that are in the process of making that project come to reality. That project is not going to happen. I have been working on the Enbridge pipeline for a while now, and it was only until Copenhagen that I realized that that pipeline is not going to go through. It will be defeated. I'm fully confident of that.
Well, that's a very heartening statement, because if that can be defeated, then maybe other things can also be defeated, and we can start winning, because we've got to turn the world around. The people who are running the show have brought us to the edge and over the edge of environmental catastrophe. And the people who are running the world have brought us to the edge, and probably once again over the edge, of economic catastrophe and societal catastrophe. That seems to be where we're balanced right now. They have created unparalleled disaster. If we can't get rid of them and begin to run this world somehow better, then we're going down.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I say this, it's just a fact that if you are literate, if you're environmentally literate, which I like the terminology about literate, not just from having book knowledge or scientific knowledge or anything like that, but just if you're environmentally literate and are able to appreciate the importance of wilderness and fresh, clean water and the just value of that.
What we have, what we need to live in.
Yeah. It's just that, when I went to UVic and studied the environmental catastrophe at the university level, it's clear that when you graduate with that, you come out of that and you know that it's over. I mean, the momentum of destruction and the entrenchment of hardcore right-wing capitalist government and power is so overwhelming, and the obstacles to undoing that damage are so difficult. And the destruction is already so far advanced. It seems very clear that we're not going to survive this. But that's not an excuse for pessimism. It's that the awakened world, this progressive community, this growing awareness, this critical mass that I'm sensing, my street sense. I mean, I was a taxi driver in Victoria for 7 years, and taxi drivers really get a street sense, a really good political intuition, where people are at in society. And I'm feeling this critical mass of energy. That's where to be, because this is the most enlightened sector of humanity. You know, the progressive community that recognize that global ecological catastrophe and are working amongst themselves to change that. I don't want to be hanging around with the ignoramus community that to me, like on the way here when I was walking down here today, I saw some guy going by in a Humvee. And to me, it's just astounding that person driving that Hummer can even be seen in public with that machine. Like, I mean, it's so socially unacceptable. This guy is so far off the planet. He's living, he does not give a shit about future generations or his own children or his grandchildren. It's that amount of arrogance and greed that, and when I look around and I see a 10,000 square foot house or all these, very visible excesses in our society, I'm realizing we don't have to waste our time educating these people. They're so far gone, it's not even important. But I feel very strongly that the progressive masses are moving, and that we're going to end run around the system. And we don't need to waste our time in the process. Like, I mean, on the Enbridge Gateway Pipeline, the government, the Stephen Harper government has just initiated a Canadian environmental assessment process. There's 5 environmental groups sitting in that process. What the hell? Like, what is there? Like, they're getting paid $80,000. Forest Ethics is receiving $80,000 to sit in Stephen Harper's environmental assessment of the Enbridge Gateway Pipeline. Why do they accept $80,000 to sit at the table and say no, never? What else is there to talk about?
But they're not saying no, never.
Well, what else is there to say? If they're at an environmental assessment, if they're not sitting there and saying no and never, then they're talking mitigation. Then they're talking about, it's like if I want to succeed with a development application here in Victoria, I want to put in a big condo tower. If I plan to build a 20-story condo tower, my initial application is for a 50-story condo tower. So when I apply to put in a 50-story condo tower, all the neighborhood erupts. There's outrage. There's people demonstrating. There's letters to the editor. There's this big kerfuffle goes on. And then I come back with my much more reasonable suggestion. Okay, I've listened to the community. We've heard from the people. We recognize people don't want a 50-story condo tower, so we've modified our plans. We've listened, and now we're having a 20-story condo tower. In the same way, Forest Ethics has demonstrated time and again that they're going to go into that Enbridge pipeline negotiation, and they're going to say, well, you guys are asking for a 36-inch pipeline. We think, it'd be better if you had a 24-inch pipeline, They're going to say, well, double-hull tankers just aren't cutting it. We need triple-hull tankers.
And folks, that is the history of what's happened. The only 2 agreements I really know of are the Great Bear Rainforest and this new boreal, because I just don't follow them that closely. But from what I've heard of the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, which, is exactly this same process all over again, is that it's a disaster. I believe that only about 30% of the so-called Great Bear Rainforest is protected. And and it's protected in quotation marks because, I don't know, mining, hunting, etc. are allowed in that 30%. The other 70% is supposed to be logged in some new and wonderful way so that it's not really going to hurt anything, but that's not happening, of course. And the worst problem is that when the companies and the corporations have taken the 70%, they're going to take the 30% that's protected because it is not protected.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked about the Great Bear Rainforest deal, but frankly, Jack, I moved up to the Great Bear Rainforest because, Vancouver Island, the forests here have been exterminated. I'm primarily at heart a forest activist. I just, the destruction of ancient forest, it hurts me psychologically. It hurts me when I see that forest destroyed, and I'm motivated to act. And I moved to the Great Bear Rainforest because that's what needs protection. Vancouver Island's done. There's nothing more here left to protect. Just very little odd postage stamps. I mean, all the power to Ken Wu and the Ancient Forest Alliance for going out and protecting the Avatar Grove and that sort of thing. But I went to the Great Bear Rainforest because that's where the action is. However, now that I've been up there for 3 years, there's almost no logging because the price of wood has collapsed. So, and my read on the global economic catastrophe, by all my sense, what I see is this volatile stock market going on these roller coasters and the price of the Canadian dollar. You can almost watch it as it approaches parity with the American dollar, all the Canadian banks and all the political machinations and capitalist machinations that are going on trying to squash it back down again, because once it starts to get ahead, then, our economy, the economic situation in the world is so incredibly volatile. It's almost conceivable to think that there will never be a major logging disaster, a pulse that goes into the Great Bear Rainforest. I'm focused on that pipeline. That's British Columbia's impending ecological catastrophe of the worst order, and that's the other thing. However, there are forest issues that I'd like to discuss. For example, I don't know if we should segue into the Nanaimo community drinking watershed.
Perfect time. Let's do it.
On the weekend, I spoke at the Nanaimo Water Conference called Our Water, Our Future. And this was organized over the past year. And about a year ago, I was invited to speak. And it was a great privilege because they had Maud Barlow and Rafe Mayer and Corky Evans and Arthur Caldecott and Robin Matthews, a great line of speakers. And to be invited to speak there was a great privilege. So about a year ago, they invited me and I accepted. And then about 2 weeks later, I got an email from one of the organizers that said, there's been some very serious complaints. People at the city of Nanaimo and the logging company have protested you being on the speakers list. And what do you say to that? And I said, they don't like me, obviously, but I'd still. And they said, well, don't worry, Ingmar. We've told them that you're still speaking, and we're gonna keep that. So great, So a couple of months went by, and part of the plan for the Nanaimo Water Conference was to include a tour of the Nanaimo community drinking watershed, which is a subject that I know a thing or two about. It was sort of my first environmental campaign, and I'll get into that in a sec. But they emailed me 2 weeks later. And it turned out that the logging company, which is Island Timberlands, a Bermuda-based logging company, which owns about 20% of Vancouver Island, and including the 230 square kilometer Nanaimo community drinking watershed, where 80,000 people get their drinking water, it's owned by this Bermuda-based logging corporation. So Island Timberlands had contacted the organizers and said, no, we're not not going to allow a bus tour in our drinking watershed, and we're just not going to allow it. So they said, well, that's incredible. That's what our conference is about, is the problems with the privatization of our drinking water. And here's this company that's telling us that we can't bring our water drinkers up to see their own drinking watershed. So they went and took the issue to Nanaimo's mayor and council. Now, because the Nanaimo Community Drinking Watershed is a community drinking watershed that's managed by the Greater Nanaimo, or formerly the Greater Nanaimo Water District, which was part of Nanaimo City, it's got a public entry into it, but still the logging company controls what goes on up there. And so they went to mayor and council and said, look, we're having this water conference and we want to do a tour of the watershed. We want to get people in there and see what's going on. And they debated about it and hemmed and hawed and came back and said, yeah, well, that should work out. We'll send you, can go up there. And they got a hold of the logging company. And the logging company got back again and said, okay, well, you want to take your bus tour in the watershed, but we will control the tour. Our spokespeople will describe the situation and take the tour and guide the tour up there, and we don't want to hear from any of your interpretations, right? And so the water organizers said, well, no, we don't want to hear your industry spiel. We could maybe make give you some option to present your case, but in this case, we want to interpret the watershed as we see it and that sort of thing, and bring our own experts and that. So, finally, in the end, Island Timberlands agreed and told them, yes, well, you can go ahead and do your tour in the drinking watershed. So 2 weeks ago, I got the heads up that, yes, the Nanaimo drinking watershed tour is on, and you're going to be one of the guides, right? So on the buses and explaining what's going on, what you're looking at here. Well, 3 days before the conference, the organizers received a letter from Island Timberlands that said, okay, you want your bus tour in the community drinking watershed? You got 400 people that want a tour there. You got to provide 400 hard hats, and you got to provide 400 high vis vests, and you got to provide 400 pairs of cork boots, so that your guests won't get injured. And by the way, Mr. Lee is forbidden to enter the watershed. So they're telling me that I'm not allowed in the community drinking watershed. Well, the tour, the organizers of the Nanaimo Water Conference, bless them, they canceled the tour. They just said we can't meet those conditions, and that's an issue. That's a serious issue. Now, why is Island Timberlands? Why don't they want me in the watershed? Well, to make a long story short, I was tree planting in the Nanaimo community drinking watershed about 10 years ago. And we were using this industrial chemical fertilizers that were part of the contract. The Weyerhaeuser, in those days it was Weyerhaeuser that was owned the property. And we'd had these fertilizers at numerous Weyerhaeuser contracts here and there across BC, and it's a sort of a granular fertilizer. And the idea is you plant your tree and then you make another hole and you put a measure of fertilizer down the hole. And so anyway, this fertilizer product was making our tree planters sick. And I actually witnessed tree planters vomiting, and my own symptoms were headaches and baby aspirin taste down my throat, and some people had skin conditions. There was something wrong with that fertilizer, so we took it to Can Test Labs in Vancouver and got them to test it. And to do a heavy metal test is about $200 in those days. So we cobbled together a couple of $100 and took it off, got it tested. The results came back. It was loaded with cadmium at alarming levels. The lab technician mentioned that right on the result. And other carcinogenic heavy metals like chromium, strontium, nickel, zinc, all in significant levels. So we presented the results of these tests to Weyerhaeuser.
Now, this was being used for fertilizer for trees being planted in the Nanaimo drinking watershed.
Yeah.
This is the area where the city of Nanaimo gets its water.
230 square kilometer drinking watershed. Now, you would think in a community drinking watershed, it makes sense. And I'll just notice these are the management principles for the Greater Vancouver watersheds. And if I could just, they're quite interesting because it juxtaposes with what's going on in the Nanaimo drinking watershed.
You're reading from the Greater Vancouver.
There's 2 community-owned drinking watersheds in British Columbia, Victoria and Vancouver. And everything else is either privately owned or it's on Crown land or something like that, and there's logging in there. So these 2 community-owned drinking watersheds, there's no logging allowed in there. Now,
well, wait a second.
I'm not going to get into, I understand there's problems in those watersheds, and there is some logging in the Victoria watershed, but for all intent, compared to, now you look at the Nanaimo watershed.
I just want to say that there used to be a commercial logging operation in the Victorian watershed, and that was stopped because a group of citizens went to court and fought our own CRD Water Commission to stop the logging, and were successful over the objections of our own elected representatives. This is going back a number of years, and hopefully the current representatives are more aware of the issues. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'll just read these 5 principles of the Greater Vancouver watersheds because I think they're pretty good. And to me, it's a no-brainer. It's a community drinking watershed, and it should be preserved in perpetuity for the sole production of precious, pure drinking water forever.
Yes.
I don't care if you're a Gordon Campbell neocon fascist or a hardcore left-wing communist. I don't care what political bent you're from and you're trying to get elected. Why is it that a politician can't say as part of their platform, if I'm elected, I'm going to make that the sole purpose of that area is I'm going to protect that for the production of drinking water. And here's what a protected drinking water watershed is managed according to these principles. The primary purpose of Greater Vancouver's watersheds is to provide clean, safe water. 2, the watersheds will be managed to reflect and advance the region's commitment to the environmental stewardship and protection of those lands and their biological diversity. 3, the region's management plan will be based upon the minimum intervention absolutely necessary to achieve the board's objectives. 4, the management plan will contain policies to return areas disturbed by human activities as close as possible to the pre-disturbance state, consistent with the primary goal of protecting water quality. And 5, the decision-making process will be transparent and open to the public.
Sounds wonderful.
Okay, so now we'll go to Nanaimo. And I can say to the viewers that if you fly over the Nanaimo community drinking watershed, because you have to remember that Island Timberlands has prevented the public from going in there, you'll see that there is not a stick of forest left in that 230 square kilometer basin. It's been clear-cut, absolutely clear-cut from stem to stern, and it's got the highest concentration of road construction, like logging road construction, of any, per hectare of any area in British Columbia. This area is not being managed for its drinking water production. It's being managed for perpetual clear-cut logging. And if you look at the forest structure in the area, the primeval forests are gone. They've been stripped off. And not only that, but the second growth forests, like as they had started logging at the foot of the mountain and moved their way up, and having taken off the old growth near the top of the mountain, because the top of the mountain is these subalpine colonies or subalpine areas that don't have big trees in them. But the second growth has also already been stripped off too. It's just a perpetual logging vision. And the interesting thing is that what interest does Island Timberlands have in staying in the watershed? There's no money in there for them. They've logged out everything that's possible to be logged there. There's absolutely no revenue. Well, there's two options. Either they are hoping that due to some Stephen Harper, Gordon Campbell machinations, that there will be some sort of compensation provided for watershed ownership, for water rights and that sort of thing, that, maybe they want to start charging for the water that the people of Nanaimo are using. The other more likely thing is that they're hoping to subdivide. Now, it's unlikely that they're going to get subdivisions inside, it's way back in the mountains up there. I think what Island Timberlands is hoping is that the city of Nanaimo will expropriate the watershed. And when we use the word expropriate, that means that they would expect to get fair market value for those lands. And the figures I've been hearing bandied about for the 230 square kilometer watershed are $160,000 or $160 million. So $160 million, people of Nanaimo want their watershed, pay up, So anyway, we went to, we had this water conference on the weekend, and my message in my lecture was that expropriation is too polite a word for the Bermuda-based logging corporation. Confiscation is what we are going for. Confiscation. Just go up there and just take it. And so,
plus send them the bill for fixing it up.
Well, that's right. And we're just getting our ducks in order now, and to do that, I think, is an eminently winnable effort. And so I've proposed to the conference participants that what we do first is we recognize the 10,000-year history of First Nations on that land, in that watershed. Right from the estuary to the top, there's a long history of First Nations occupation on that land, and these are people that left a legacy after 10,000 years of civilization with the absolute highest level of biodiversity, the complexity of the forest structure, 100 meters deep of biodiversity when you measure from the top of the big trees to the ground. This is the highest measure of civilization. Civilization is not measured when you have all this bells and whistles, but you've destroyed the planet in 100 years. These people were there for 10,000 years. They had a magnificent civilization. Anyway, a proper environmental campaign requires permission from First Nations. We need their blessing. So to commence the campaign to take back the Nanaimo drinking watershed, we need to go to the First Nation and make a request and receive their blessing and their permission to travel freely in the watershed for the purpose of protecting it. And I have confidence that with a respectful request like that it will be forthcoming. Permission will be forthcoming. So now, having received permission from the real owners, this is unceded territory. There's never been a treaty or anything that gave Island Timberlands the ownership of that land. This is unceded territory, and so we would have the blessing, the sanction, and the permission of the owners of that land base to go and conduct our campaign. Now, the first thing we would do, as what I'm recommending, is that we have a very minimally organized or not over-organized effort, an effort that allows the broadest diversity of the community to express their environmental efforts through the skill set that they're comfortable with. And when you have that kind of non-structured organization, certainly no top-down organization, no leadership structure, no message management, this enables a broad diversity of people to come into the effort and use their skill sets to their best advantage. People would have the choice to situate themselves as centrally or as peripherally to the effort, and find their comfort zone within the project. I mean, some people might be more, we would do this in a nonviolent civil disobedient manner. But I'm talking about a persistent nonviolent civil disobedience, and my nature is a belligerent nonviolent civil disobedience. It's just sort of the skill set that I'm stuck with. I've tried meditating. I went to India a bunch of times and tried to chisel some of the rough edges off my character. But sooner or later, you just have to accept your limitations and work with the skill set that you're stuck with. And belligerence and stubbornness and pig-headedness is something I inherited from my dad, and I'm putting it to use. I can, people can situate themselves in there, and we've got an incredible start on it. I mean, that conference, those people, the 400 participants that signed up for the Nanaimo Water Conference on the weekend, largely a silver-haired crowd. We didn't have a lot of young people there. It wasn't really, there needs to be some effort to make it more attractive to the young people. But direct action, nonviolent civil disobedience is hugely fun. It's a beautiful watershed. It's going to be a very fun effort. And so, I mean, the first thing that I would like to do, and I'd like to take inspiration from dear Alexandra Morton, who's done this fish get-out migration that attracted, the Times columnists would say, nearly 1,000 people showed up at the legislature. I mean, we're talking like thousands, 5,000 people. I have suggested that we do an annual march to the watershed. Perhaps the first year we might get a few hundred people out there, and we may be confronted. I mean, Island Timberlands obviously hasn't learned from... See, when Weyerhaeuser fired me for refusing to handle the chemical fertilizers in the Nanaimo drinking watershed, that launched my environmental activist career. I had been concerned about forests and that sort of thing, but that was what kicked me over the edge.
So we have Weyerhaeuser to thank for you.
I'm grateful, I have to hand, and now we've got Island Timberlands that bars me from the community drinking watershed. I mean, I didn't finish my statement. I mean, we found the carcinogenic heavy metals. Eventually, we found that chemical fertilizer product that they used in the watershed was laced with dioxins as well, derived from U.S. industrial waste. I mean, and we proved it with Freedom of Information that there were at least 60 tons, semi-truckloads of this chemical fertilizer has been, just saturated into the community drinking watershed. So the first year, we'd have a fairly significant crowd, I believe, and that's something deeply terrifying to the Island Timberlands organization. The next year, we would shoot for double that. The next year, double that. I think within 5 years, the people of Nanaimo will own their drinking watershed, and those rapscallions will be back to Bermuda. And I think it's imminently doable. And what I'm saying is that we will not waste our time with fundraising, with tactics and strategy palavers. It's just get out there, go explore the watershed, find out what's going on up there, visit it, and just start. People working at their skill set.
However you want to participate.
However they want to express it. And I feel there was so much momentum. And again, I come back to this critical mass. A few years ago, people weren't ready to act. Now they're ready. I sense that. My political instincts tell me that the collaborationist approach that's being taken by, forest ethics and Sephora Berman. Sephora Berman shouldered her way through the crowds at Copenhagen to get into the business as usual tent and rushed over to give Gordon Campbell an award for environmental leadership. At that point, you got, I mean, you look at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, one of Canada's most prosperous environmental organizations, accepting $2.5 million from the Enbridge Pipeline Corporation. And the same day that they got the $2.5 million, immediately Enbridge on their website, our partners in conservation, Nature Conservancy of Canada. And, you know, just for even more hypocrisy, the Nature Conservancy of Canada is the namesake of the Nature Conservancy of the United States. The Nature Conservancy of the United States heard that Nature Conservancy of Canada had accepted $2.5 million from Enbridge Gateway, and they issued a disclaimer to their Canadian friends and said, by the way, we are different. We're the Nature Conservancy. That's the Nature Conservancy of Canada. We're different. We disagree. They shouldn't have accepted $2.5 million from Enbridge. Well, if you look at who funds the Nature Conservancy, it's like, you know, 3M, Boeing, you know, McDonnell Douglas. It's just a big giant scam too. So, you know, people are on to the fact these due process environmental organizations, the standard format, if you want to run an environmental organization, you have your employees and all that sort of thing. 80% of the energy of the employees is in fundraising. 20% in action, and that action being limited by due process. If you have a due process charitable status to your organization, you're limited in what you can say on the environmental front. You can't do anything.
And that's what we're up against, folks. And unfortunately, we're also up against the end of this 1 hour show. Ingmar, thank you very much. It's always a treat.
Thanks, Jack.
So the message is we're winning. It may look like we're losing, but big changes are about to happen. And I think we all have to join in and make those changes happen. My own issue is media and democracy. We have neither a democracy nor a free press. Those are my big issues. You've heard Ingmar's issues. Whatever yours are, and moving ahead, the retaking of our nation and the democratization of our nation so we can win these battles, please join in. This has been Face to Face. Thank you for watching.